present our 2016 Live Selectmen Forum. I am Tim Poet, Milford TV News and Sports Director, also the host of the Milford Informer. We're so happy to have you with us. This is giving us an opportunity to give the Milford voting public a chance to get an early look at some of the candidates for the upcoming April local town elections, and we're very happy to have the two candidates vying for the Board of Selectmen with us this evening. We'll give them quick introductions here. First, the five-time term-serving member of the Board of Selectmen, currently serving as the board's chair. We have Brian Murray with us this evening. Brian, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tim.
And we also have, finishing up his second term on the school committee for Milford, we have Patrick Holland as the challenger for this year's Board of Selectmen race. Patrick, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And as everyone remembers from last year, again, the purpose of this forum, we did it last year, was very successful. So it gives us a chance to, again, expose the voting public to one of the races for the upcoming ballot. And it also gives us the opportunity to bring in some of our Milford TV members to help us do that. And so we have a panel of who we like to call our Milford TV political insiders, providing the questions for this evening's forum. And so we will go down the line introducing them to you now. First, down at the far end, we have Kevin Rudden, who is the host of 30 Minutes with the Town Crier. Kevin, thank you for joining us. Tell us a little bit about your show real quickly.
30 Minutes with the Town Crier airs every other Friday night at 6:30 and then goes up on YouTube, and Milford TV repeats it many times the next week. And Town Crier publisher Al Holman and I interview people from all walks of life in Milford, politicians, business people, and just interesting folks.
All right, great. And in the middle for our panel, we have John TEHAN, who is the host of All Politics is Local. John, thank you for joining us. Tell us a little bit about your show.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Tim. My show is basically, the title says it all politics is local. So I try to get people who are in local politics onto the show, but sometimes local means worldwide. I've had people on with issues of national importance and of international importance. I really enjoy doing the show. What I really love best, though, is the local stuff right here. Your local vote counts more than your national vote, so people should really get out and vote. And I hope everyone that's watching tonight does get out and vote in the April election. All
right, great. And finally, last but not least, a grizzled veteran of Milford cable access, predating us here on Milford TV, but he is the host of That Milford Show, Al CORREIA. Al, thank you for joining us. About how many shows now have you produced?
384.
That's, it must seem like only yesterday.
It does, and it's still surprising that for the second year in a row, and I don't know how it's possible, I'm to the left of John TEHAN.
just throwing a little curveball in there for all the viewers at home. Well, thank you guys again so much for joining us. And so just to go over the ground rules very quickly before we get into the real meat of our forum here tonight, how it's going to work in just a moment. We're going to open the floor for opening statements for each of our candidates, and then from there we turn things over to the panel for the remainder of the night. Our panelists are going to be asking a series of questions. Each panelist has a total of 4 prepared questions. Each are going to give 3 of their questions. Then we will move on to the next panelist and so forth. Once each panelist has given their 3 initial questions, time permitting, we'll go through the panel one final time. Each panelist will give 1 more question, and then again, time permitting, we hope to provide some closing statements from each of our candidates as well. So we won't waste any more time. We'll get right into things, and Chairman Murray will open up the floor to you for your opening statement.
Tim, thank you very much. And before I get started, let me just commend everybody here at Milford TV. You know, when I come in here and I see this room, my memory goes back to what was down at the Comcast building, which was akin to a laundry room, and that was where it was produced. And you know, the Board of Selectmen at that time, it must be 5 or 6 years ago, because we just renewed the contract, you know, we put together this nonprofit corporation, and at the time that we were doing it, it was a little bit controversial. There was certainly some doubt as to whether or not this was going to be worthwhile. A large amount of money was coming in here, and you know, the group that has put this together, all of you that work here, Rob O'Keefe and the staff, you have really brought to life what we envisioned 6 years ago in terms of community TV. This is the essence, bringing home local government shows so people can know what happens in their town. So I commend all of you for the great work you've done here at the TV station. I want to thank you for having me here, and thank you for this very informative program. In terms of why I'm running for re-election to the Board of Selectmen, quite simply, I think that there's a lot more work to do. I'm finishing up the Armory renovation program. It's about 1.5 years now, a little over a year. It's a $5 million renovation of the Armory for our youth center. It's a project that I've been very involved in since day one. It's really like a second job, and I want to finish that through. On a more broader scale, you know, I really think that our town is on the cusp of really an economic and cultural change. You know, when you look at our largest employer, the Milford Regional Medical Center, you see the growth that that's brought, both in terms of the medical community regionally, and then also the employment situation. And that's going to filter out. That's going to change Main Street. That's going to develop into like what you see in Worcester in terms of the UMass campus, the Longwood campus in Boston. And I think those kinds of issues are going to involve decisions. I think those decisions need to be made thoughtfully, reasonably, and with a fair degree of experience. And I think I bring that to the board. And I think it's very important to have a diverse, educated opinion on the Board of Selectmen. And I think at this particular time, with the complexion of the board, the issues that Milford face, I think I can be great service to the community, and I'm looking to continue to do that.
Thank you, Brian. Mr. Holland.
Pardon me. One of the reasons why I chose to run for the Board of Selectmen now is because I feel like I can address a problem that, in my opinion, has gone unaddressed for quite some time in the town of Milford. And that would be the fact that downtown Main Street is no longer a place for members of the community to socialize and to shop. And I feel that we lose something in our community when we no longer have that centering point. And I have a sort of a unique set of experience. I am a local attorney, but I've also spent 14 years working in retail marketing and development. And so my primary role in that job has been to help independent business owners be more successful. And so I do agree with Brian that we have, it's a watershed moment that's coming here in Milford, and I believe that we're on the precipice of a very important time for this town. The growth of the hospital is tremendously important. The hospital is along our Main Street. So the hospital is, we need to make sure that we are growing and developing economically between our Main Street and to our hospital in a way that is thoughtful. And we need to do so with a long-range plan. And I've noticed that our downtown area hasn't had a long-range plan. There hasn't been a goal that we've been working towards on Main Street to try and fix some of the problems that are there. And I understand that it's a difficult thing to fix Main Street. It's not the type of project that you can just throw some money at and hope it'll be better. So we can't put up awnings or we can't purchase new street lights and hope that's what's going to revitalize our downtown. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg. It's not going to work. We need a thoughtful, long-range development plan, and I have the experience to start putting a plan like that together. And the truth is, I understand why many selectmen have been sort of reluctant to address this issue recently. I mean, as far back as 2008, I believe there was an article in the Milford Daily News decrying the end to the Fall Festival. And Mr. Murray was quoted in that article as saying that, you know, it really is a shame that that festival is going away, but the nature of Main Street has changed. There just isn't the retail there anymore that would support that type of a festival. And I'm not so willing to throw my hands up and say I can't fix that we can't fix that as a community. Certainly I can't fix it. That we can't fix that as a community. I think that if we come together and if we develop a long-range plan, we can restore vibrancy to our Main Street and give back an important part of our community that we've been losing for so long.
All right, thank you very much. We will now open it up to our panel, and Kevin, we'll start with your questions.
Well, my first question has to do with what both of you just said. And basically, I believe I'm starting with, is it Brian first?
It will be Patrick first.
Okay, Patrick. What steps can you take to make downtown more hospitable to shoppers?
You know, I think we have to put everything on the table. You know, it's a very difficult problem that we have to face. It's not a problem that we can fix with taxpayer money. And to explain my point, I'll discuss very briefly, you know, the renovation that we did for the athletic fields at the high school. So we had athletic fields in the high school that were retaining water, they were in poor condition, they were very difficult for our students to use. And so the solution to that is put together a committee to develop a plan to replace that field. That committee put in the hard work to get that field replaced, and now it's done. And now that field is fixed. we can't do that with Main Street. We can't just spend money on trying to correct some of the problems that are there, because the problems are structural. And the problem, the things that we need to do to try and fix what's happening along our Main Street involve getting members of the community involved who are subject matter experts in various fields, whether they be real estate or retail or restaurateurs. And we need to look at all of the options that we have to try and fix what's happening along Main Street. Parking is an enormous problem along Main Street. We have things that we can do with zoning that perhaps we can change to fix Main Street. We have different ways that we can incentivize businesses along Main Street. And I think all of that needs to come together as part of a long-range development plan put together by a committee that can inform us the right ways in which we can move forward. And it's not a short-term solution. It's a long-term solution. It took us a long time to get here. You know, Mr. Murray said in an interview last week with Al CORREIA that it's never going to be 1950 again on Main Street. Well, I wasn't born in 1950. I wasn't even born in 1960. I did catch the tail end of the 70s. I'd like to go back to 1985 on Main Street. You know, I don't think it was so long ago that Main Street was a focal point for socialization and for shopping in our community. And I'm just not willing to give that up. I'm not willing to throw up my hands and say, no, I can't handle this problem. We can't handle this problem. We simply have to move on and just accept that all of our economic development is going to happen on the periphery of our town. I just don't believe that that's right, and I think that we can do more. I think that we can do better.
All right, Brian.
Brian, same question. What steps could be taken to make downtown more hospitable to business?
Well, I mean, a couple of things. First of all, if we're talking about 1985 on Main Street, I don't think that that's where we want to go back to. That was not the time of Dollar Saver and WT grants. That was the time of the 4Rs, the Comac, what else was there? Jolly Roger, KRs, Vinnie's Back Door. There was a tremendous amount of bar rooms. I remember one of the first things when I came back from law school in the mid-'80s, actually it was 1986, 1985, and shortly after that they had the hearings on TV, very early cable, where the police officers had to wear the bags on their head about shutting down some of the liquor licenses because of the drug activity. Now, the condition of Main Street at that time gave rise to the Community Development Block Program, which only allocated funds to blighted and deteriorated areas. Main Street constituted a blighted and deteriorated area in the mid-'80s. That's what led to the success of the Community Development Block Program that we had probably from the early 90s right up until, oh gosh, I think the last one that we had was 2013. That was probably close to $20 million over that time period to restore Main Street, the infrastructure. We're talking about the parking lots, the sidewalks, the decorative lighting, the drainage. All of the infrastructure was put in. And yes, there was awnings, there were some amenities as well, but that grant program through the period of that time built up Main Street. So, you know, Main Street is a lot different than it was in 1985, and I think if we think realistically, it's much better than it was in 1985. Now, you know, talking about going forward, trying to improve Main Street, well, you know, the first thing that we need to do is to listen to the business people on Main Street and see what they want. And there's been a reluctance on some members of the board to do that. Of all the people that talk about Main Street, involved at meetings, I'm the only person that works there. I have a building on Main Street. I'm there all the time. I'm walking, I'm talking to people. Parking is a major concern. Instead of increasing parking incrementally sometime at various portions, our board has decreased parking, which I thought was a mistake and I was opposed to. Now, the planning board has come forth with a couple of very interesting solutions because you're talking about the mixed use. When you look at the cities, you know, Boston, you know, New York, Washington, you know, they're revitalizing neighborhoods by way of mixed use. And the planning board had a proposal to allow limited residential use at the third or fourth floor of certain buildings on Main Street. It's probably only targeting about 30, 35 units, but it's a launching point that would allow property owners to invest in their property, upgrade their property, bring residential people downtown. Now you're going to have a built-in client base. and that's going to further spark business on Main Street.
We'll have to wrap it up there, unfortunately.
There are other proposals that are on the table in terms of increasing parking, taking some properties, but unfortunately there has not been an outgrowth of support to try to do that.
Thank you so much. Kevin, your next question, and it will go to Brian first.
Okay. Brian, are you in favor of the proposed bus transportation system in Milford?
Yes, I am. Let's see, if we count the Armory as my second job, Harold Rhodes has made sure that that's my third job. Milford, had discussions with the MWRTA back when it first came into existence in 2006, 2007. As a lot of you know, the problem that we had was the communities that make up that organization all get subsidy from the state by way of a deduction from the offset from the MBTA. So they're communities that either have an MBTA in their town or adjacent to their town. Milford would have been one of the sole communities that was not in that. Therefore, we don't get the state assistance. It would come straight out of the operational budget. That's why it never really got off ground zero for all of those years. Fast forward to 2015, Harold Rhodes, chairman of the Commission on Disability, has been very instrumental in driving this issue. And also Milford has changed. Getting back to the Milford Regional Medical Center, very interested in public transportation. The Chamber of Commerce has come out in favor, very interested in public transportation. Again, if we want to revitalize Main Street, if we want to bring people downtown, public transportation is going to be a key component. So yes, I am in favor of that. I've been working very hard this year to try to bring this proposal to the town of Milford. We're working through the process. Hopefully we're going to be meeting with the Finance Committee. I'm hopeful that we can get it to town meeting, and let's have town meeting debate the issue and make a decision on it.
Thank you.
I am generally in support of public transportation. I think that there are several groups in town that would be particularly well served by having public transportation available to them. I think about our senior citizens who need the opportunity to get around our town. I think about people who have disabilities who need an opportunity to get around our town. And I also think that the hospital would be a particularly large beneficiary of having a bus service, a public transportation service in Milford. So there's a lot of good that public transportation can do. I think we need to be cautious, though, in the way that we set that service up. Public transportation, ideal public transportation, in my opinion, wouldn't be transportation that allowed people to leave town, say, to go shop in Framingham. I think that might not be the best use of public transportation. There's been some different scenarios set up of whether it's a local bus that just does a loop in Milford, or whether it's a bus that begins in Framingham, travels out through Ashland and Holliston, and ends up in Milford. So I think that the way the route is structured is very important. I think that it is something that should be up for debate and should be up for more forums with the community. And of course, like anything else that we do in town, we need to be very cautious in the way that we pay for it. We can't purchase services that we can't pay for. And so we need to move forward, absolutely. We need to move forward with more public forums and more debate. And we need to find a way to structure a bus route that's going to serve the populations in Milford that so desperately need that service, being the senior citizens and the disabled.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Patrick. Okay. And Kevin, your last question.
Last question, I guess Patrick gets first,
Yes.
which is, does Milford have enough athletic facilities?
Well, I think you'd ask any parent who has a child playing athletics that they'd say that we need more athletic facilities. I think that we have so many students that engage actively in sports, and we have so many sports available now. I remember when I was in high school, we didn't have a lacrosse team, we didn't have a hockey team. And all of these teams, of course, need field space. And so at the new Woodland School, we're putting in a beautiful new field that's going to be available to our students and to our student athletes. I think that we can do a different and better job of maintaining some of the field space that we already have, some of the natural grass fields that we have in town. They're generally in good repair, but I think that we need to make sure that we are constantly making improvements. I think one thing that we saw just before I came onto the school committee, we had a very, very small maintenance budget that we used on a yearly basis to maintain our schools. And then we really upped that number. So we spend more than $1 million a year doing capital improvements in our school buildings, and I think that we need to do much the same with the town to make sure that we stay proactive with our fields at Rosenfeld Park and the other athletic fields that we have. I'd like to see improvements happen at Pheno Field as well. I think that that's a field that is in need of a recreational makeover. But of course, we have to think about and plan for these things in the right way. So we are expanding opportunities for our student athletes by maintaining and making better our existing properties so that they're more functional in the long run.
Okay. Brian?
I'm glad you bring that up, Kevin. As you know, one of the projects that I'm just coming off of is the athletic complex up at the high school. And that issue came to me from some very frustrated school employees who did not feel that the administration and the school committee was listening to them at that time. And the condition of the football field at that time was shameful. There was no other way to say it. It was absolutely shameful. It was an embarrassment for a community of our size. So with their help, I had a committee appointed by the selectmen, and we went forward. We investigated options, and we found that the best field to do was the artificial turf. Many communities had had it at that point, pro teams, college teams, and the beauty of the artificial field is that it's like having 10 fields. You can go 24/7 on that field, so you can have a game at 2 o'clock, trot another team out at 4 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and keep on going. So, by putting one artificial field, it's almost like putting 10 natural grass fields in. So that project went forward, and I think it's been a very good success. It came in very well financially at a time period when the economy was bad. We got a great bid on it. We allowed to expand on it, do over the tennis courts, the track, and the softball field. Other facilities in town, it's not just outdoor fields. The Parks Department are in charge of our outside fields, and I think they do a great job in maintaining them. I know that they're planning a Pheno Field renovation project, and I'm looking forward to that. But the other facilities are indoor, and losing the gymnasium at Middle School East is going to be an issue. One of the other things that I'm working on right now is the renovation of the Armory. That's going to be a full gymnasium in there. And I think when you look to design these facilities, you've got a couple of things, okay? You've got to have low maintenance, all right? Once you put it, it's got to be easy and cost-free to maintain as possible over the years. And two, it's got to be multi-purpose. So the artificial field at the high school is lined for 5 different sports. That's what you can have there. So you've got to really, where you've only got limited area, you've got to take the most advantage of what you have. Does Milford have enough right now? I guess, but something, we've got our artificial field. It's nice to see that, some of the people who are against the artificial field are now putting it at Woodland. But other towns, other communities, they're on their 4th and 5th artificial turf field, because they see the durability, they see the expanded use. So, I think it's fine, but it's obviously something that I'm in favor of, something I support the Parks Department, because to me, and it's not only kids, community members, senior citizens, they like to walk, do whatever on the facilities. But, let's stick with young people. If young people are on the fields or in the theater or participating in music, they're not out on the streets. And they're growing, they're developing, and that's what we want our young people to do.
Thank you so much, Brian. And thank you, Kevin. So we'll move on now to John Tehan. And John, your first question will go to Chairman Murray.
Okay, my first question for both candidates, directed at Brian first. Are you in favor of the proposed gas pipeline that was slated to pass through Milford?
Well, in favor, nothing has come before us in terms of us voting on it. I went to the informational hearing that they had at one of the hotels. It's going to, cross kind of a narrow section of our town. I think it's the type of thing that has to be monitored. So it's something that our town engineer has to be keyed in on, along with the town planner. We're watching the progress of that Algonquin company to see where they're at. If there's another interval where we need to step in and issue some concerns during that hearing process, certainly we'll do that, similar to what was done with the EPA stormwater guidelines. So, I mean, it's nothing that comes before us to vote or not vote on, but in terms of being a selectman, what we would do, I think the responsible thing to do is to direct the qualified technical people to monitor it, and if something does need to be done, process-wise, maybe even politically, then we're in a position to try to do that.
And Patrick, same question for you, please.
So the gas pipeline really isn't we can't decide whether the gas pipeline comes to us or not. It's a federally regulated program. There were sort of a number of gas pipelines that were set up. One was supposed to go north through New Hampshire and then come back down to Boston. They were looking at one going along the Mass Pike. There was another that was going along Route 2, and they found the one that was going to come through Milford would be the one that had the least environmental impact. So the one, especially the one that crossed Route 2 and the one that crossed the Turnpike, were going to really do a lot of damage to wetlands. And so that was sort of one of the reasons why I think in Milford we're going to have to start dealing with this gas pipeline. There's been some discussion over philosophy over whether the gas pipeline is even necessary. I think right now the current gas supply that we can bring into Massachusetts is, I think it's 1 billion cubic feet, and I apologize if the units aren't correct. I'm not a gas pipeline expert. And so this new pipeline would essentially double the amount of gas that we could bring into Massachusetts. One of the ideas being, of course, that since so much electricity in Massachusetts is generated by natural gas, it makes sense to have that pipeline here, and it makes sense to have that pipeline available. So I guess there's a lot of pieces that go into that decision. As selectmen, I think I'd probably take the approach that they took up in New Hampshire with the New Hampshire communities that were dealing with it, where they put together public forums so people understood the impact of the pipeline, the alternatives of the pipeline, and what the benefits of that pipeline were. They also understood the environmental impact to each of the individual homeowners' properties under which the gas pipeline would be buried. My understanding is that when the pipeline is buried, it's not noticeable. Once it's in your property, they have to dig a big trench, and it's a 6 or 8 inch pipeline, and they put it underground. So, I mean, I think that there are a lot of pieces to it. There's a lot of pieces to how you deal with informing the public about that gas pipeline. I think ultimately, though, if the federal government approves it and they move forward, I think it's going to be very difficult for us to stop them.
Okay, thank you. So my next question will go to Mr. Holland. As far as state aid is concerned, sometimes we see shortfalls from the state government as far as the amount of money that we can get from them. How would you handle a shortfall in state aid as far as Milford's budget is concerned?
Well, fortunately, we're in a good place right now where we're not currently anticipating a shortfall in state aid. The governor's office has committed really to increasing state aid to towns, and I think that's a wonderful thing. For so long, we had the state was sort of siphoning money away from the communities, and now the commitment is to put some of that back to us. So hopefully in the short run, we're not going to have to deal with that. But I think in the long run, there certainly is going to be a time when we will have budget shortfalls. I think one thing that we did so successfully when I was on the school committee back during the Great Recession, or 2 years after it began, we were pressed with a number of budget cuts. And we had 0% increases, which, as anyone who pays attention to town government knows, if you're having a level funded budget, that really means you have to make cuts. And so we did what any responsible group of citizens would do that were tasked with the responsibility of cutting the budget. We worked very closely with the Finance Committee, and we, in their advisory role, they helped us find the places, or they gave advice on places where they really felt our budget needed to be. And then we took a pencil, we sharpened our pencils, and we went through the budget, and we went through it line by line, and we found the pieces that we could cut out with having minimal impact on student services. And so I'm very proud to say, as a member of the school committee, that we were able to cut the budget without having a substantial impact on class size, which is very, very important in maintaining a positive environment in our classrooms. And so I would really use the same approach. I would work closely with the Finance Committee, and I would roll up my sleeves and sharpen my pencil and find those places that we could cut the budget without having an undue impact on the services that people want. And they deserve the services that we provide for them because they pay for them, they're the taxpayers.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Murray, same question.
The best way to answer that, John, you don't put yourself in that position to have to deal with it on a yearly basis. And what that means is you build up your community financially over time. And you know, the job that I've had as a selectman, you know, I'm just a caretaker. Do you know what I mean? I'm building on work from people before me. Hopefully, people after me will build on something that I had done. But, you know, when you look at revenue coming into your town, you basically have four sources. You've got your levy, you've got your new growth, your local receipts, and your state aid. So I think the key is to be not dependent on any one of those components. And what Milford has done over the years consistently, I think with the hard work of the Finance Committee and our Finance Department, Town Treasurer, Town Accountant, and now we have the Finance Director, is to build up our reserves financially in terms of the stabilization accounts, plural, because there's more than just one stabilization account. So, you know, to build up that reserve, pay for capital projects when we can, so we're not borrowing and we're not hampered by interest. Things are a little bit different now that we're entering the phase of the Woodland program. We're not as free as we could have been, but again, you know, for a community to try to deal with that in 1 year without any of the prior financial planning is a disaster. And I think that's some of the towns that you see have problems. The nice thing about Milford is we've had consistent long-term financial planning over a large number of years that have put us in this financial position today so that if your scenario comes true, it would not be disastrous. We do have reserve accounts. We do have options that we can make that's not going to be disastrous to the taxpayer and to the residents. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens by hard work, that happens by planning, and that happens by careful attention to things.
Okay, thank you. My final question would go to Mr. Murray first. Your thoughts on the impending regulations in phosphorus in the Charles River. You talked about this earlier, you touched on it. Apparently next month the EPA is finally going to release their recommendations. What are your thoughts?
Where would you like to start with that one? You know, there's so many different levels on that, John. You know, when that issue, you know, first confronted the town of Milford, and of course the byproduct of that is that, you know, they wanted to use Milford, Bellingham, and Franklin as the model communities, the pilot programs, whatever you want to call it. It meant that we were getting hit with the huge financial crunch because we were so-called at the head of the Charles. Now, why Hopkinton was not included in that, where the Charles really starts, was beyond me. But in any event, when we first got confronted with that from, you know, the EPA, Mike Santora, our town engineer at the time, did an analysis and said, you know, if these requirements come through as is, it's going to cost our community over $60 million. So we tried to make contact with the EPA as a community. We got ignored. It was not fruitful in terms of having a meaningful discussion with EPA officials. My thought on the Board of Selectmen, and my colleagues supported me at the time, was let's go over their heads and get their federal bosses involved. Oh, nice to see you, Rob.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Want to make sure people hear it.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Sorry. I keep moving my microphone around. Sorry about that.
Nothing like live TV.
I know. But, you know, one of the things that I want to do is get the federal officials involved. So we got Senator Kerry involved. We got Representative Neal involved, McGovern's office involved, and they were very, very helpful at the time to get the EPA's attention. EPA came to Milford, agreed to do a study, and they said, no, this is only going to cost you about $50,000, you know, to do all this sort of thing. And the study went forward, and guess what? The study came back and said, yeah, we think you're right. It is going to be about $60 million. That put them back on their heels a little bit to try to figure out what the next step was.
Yep.
Meanwhile, we were able, with the help of Representative Fernandez, you know, to get legislation passed to take phosphorus out of fertilizer. And of course, all of this assumes that you agree with the conclusions that, you know, there is so much phosphorus that's detrimental to the environment, and that phosphorus level is in our water, and it's because of growth and all of that. But that's a whole other level of discussion that I don't even know if we can get into, certainly not with my 2 minutes. You know, so, but I think the point was, in terms of process as a selectman, we didn't take we didn't take being ignored by the EPA. We got the federal officials involved. They got EPA's EPA's attention, and now we've started to work on it locally. So I don't know if you know, but we're looking for a grant, we're looking for a supplement to fund a DPA grant, a DEP grant at this upcoming town meeting to install kind of a natural purifier off of Sumner Street to reduce the phosphorus as it goes to Milford Pond. The Armory project, some of the things that people don't see. If you face the Armory and you look to the left, there's a 9,000-pound interceptor that's in the ground that acts as a filter for the stormwater that comes off of that building and surrounding that building to filter it out as it goes into the stormwater drains. So we're doing all of it, increase the cost of the project, yes, but something, that's okay, because I don't think, no one wants to hurt the water, no one wants to hurt the environment, but at the same time, we have to deal with these things in a realistic, practical matter. We can't bankrupt communities, we can't bankrupt businesses, but Milford has, and I know Franklin has as well, is now working on the problem incrementally and at the local level. Now, I know these regulations are going to come forward. Our town engineer has commented on them. We're anxious to see, exactly what the final thing looks like. That's been a very frustrating process. I think that the Milford board was very proactive, and I think that we're handling it as responsibly as we can.
Okay, thank you.
Brian.
Mr. Holland, same question.
So phosphorus is in the air. It's something that we've used in fertilizer for many, many, many years. And what the new EPA regulations are trying to do is keep that phosphorus from going from the air into our water supplies, down into our water supply, so it doesn't affect life in our waterways. And so the new EPA regulations, if enacted as initially proposed to us, could be potentially devastating to the cost of doing business in the town of Milford. Essentially, any business that has acreage between 1 and 2 acres, and that's both a paved parking lot or a flat roof that's catching water, would be subject to these regulations and would have to install on their property devices that would reduce the amount of phosphorus that was released to our waterways. I think what's unique about the EPA regulations is that they pick on several communities. So they're picking on Milford, they're picking on Bellingham, and they're picking on Franklin. And so thankfully we were able to get some visibility with our representatives, and Representative Fernandez and Fatman have also worked very well on trying to get us some visibility on the potential devastating impact of these EPA regulations. Now we're going to find out soon whether we're going to be subject to those regulations as they were initially written. Now, those regulations themselves have either, if the EPA chooses to maintain the regulations, we have a very serious problem here. Now, since it is a body, this isn't a law that we're dealing with, there could be a change in administration that means that those EPA regulations aren't going to be enforced. But I could see us in the future, if we come on the side of the current regulations, of having to move forward in the court of law to make the EPA prove that this isn't going to have an effect on Milford that is disproportionate to the surrounding towns, and that they aren't in fact picking on us. So this is not an easy problem to solve. This is a problem that is going to take more legislation, potentially a court battle, and so it is something that's coming down the road, and it's something that we should be very concerned about.
Thank you.
All right, and thank you, John. Al, we'll turn things over to you.
Okay, Pat, what do you see as the 3 largest challenges that Milford's going to be facing, and how would you approach addressing them?
So, in 2 minutes.
In 2 minutes.
I mean, the biggest challenge that I think, honestly, I've spoken about this at length, we need to restore some of the vitality to our Main Street area. I think that our community has lost a place where community members can come together and can socialize and can shop, and I think that's to the detriment of our community. I think bringing back Main Street is going to require that the Board of Selectmen take an active role in putting together an office that can coordinate community activity. So we did have a community development office that was essentially just a grant writing program. It was an office that I believe it was defunded in 2014. I'm fairly certain of that date. We haven't had one since. So there is no one point person. There's no one that anybody in the community can go to talk about how we get our different community properties to work together. And we have a lot that are really terrific. We have a bike trail. We have a newly dredged Milford Pond. We have a lot of coordination that could occur to help strengthen our sense of community in this town. I think technology is a very large problem that we have right now. We handed over 4 years ago at the school department control of our IT to the town, and we struggled for 4 years with a revolving door of IT directors that just couldn't get the job done for us. And so we ended up splitting once again back to a separate IT functionality for both the school and for the town, and that was something that I was very disappointed in. It was sort of the status quo. I remember in one of the meetings, Selectman Buckley said, well, I think that we just need to go back and have the town be separated from the schools, and Selectman Murray said, I see no reason why we shouldn't do that. That's how it's always been done. Well, doing things how they've always been done is not the best way to do things. We should be doing things the right way. We should be putting together an IT infrastructure that is consistent with what other large organizations are using. Other corporations can show us the way on that. So we need to be more thoughtful in the way that we're addressing our technology. We have duplications of roles. We have IT directors for the town hall and for the town garage and for the library, a separate IT director for the schools, and then a third one for public safety. It's a duplication of roles that we just don't need, and it's something that we can address. And the last, and however much time I've left, Tim, I'm not sure how much that is.
Just a quick wrap up if you can.
Yeah, so the last is going to be illegal housing. It still happens here in Milford, and we need to maintain our vigilance to be certain that it doesn't put people in dangerous situations, not only our public safety officers if they're responding to some sort of a problem, but also our families who are living and shift sleeping in these rooms and hot bedding, and they're in a very bad situation, and they're a transient community, and we can't provide the services that we need to the children in those situations.
Thank you.
Brian, the three biggest challenges you see Milford facing and your thoughts on how to address them.
Well, I would say number one is managing the growth in the town. As I alluded to earlier, I think the Milford Regional Medical Center is going to have a lot of subsidiary businesses, or subsidiary effects on that part of Main Street. And I think managing that growth, making key decisions is going to be important. The second thing, and we've talked about this on your show, is I think fiscal discipline. It's very easy to get giddy with the kind of financial situation that we're in right now in the town, which is very favorable. I think it takes mature discipline and decision-making to make responsible decisions, that are in the best interest of the fiscal health of the town. And, the other, John touched on one, I think the EPA guidelines, which by the way, the guidelines that are coming down are not the ones targeted to the 3 towns. This is to the entire state. But that's going to be an issue that the town has to deal with, which I think we are incrementally in terms of stormwater management. The other issue that we're going to face, Al, is Middle School East. Right now, the school department has not made a decision on what they want to do with that building. It was told initially that it was going to be abandoned. I don't know if they can realistically do that. I know there's a other committee working to study it on a parallel basis. If a municipal use is cited for that building, that's all well and good, but you know what that means. That means renovations. That means cost. And right now, unlike Milford, in many of our other capital projects that we've done, we haven't really planned that one out. We're kind of at the max point in terms of bonding, so that's not going to be an option. Because the school department elected not to keep it as a school, there's no state reimbursement like we're getting with Woodland. It's going to be 100 cents on the dollar, so that's going to be, a huge issue that we're going to be facing. Just on a couple of points in terms of Main Street, the grants never dried up. What happened was we were a victim of our own success. In 2014, we didn't get funded because we had met all of the grant objectives over the years. So the community development block grant money was no longer available to Milford because we're not considered a blighted area anymore. And the technology, I think we really need to be accurate in terms of what happened with technology. In July 2010, Superintendent Trombley came before the Board of Selectmen with the technical director of the school department. Town didn't have one. And the idea was, okay, school department has a technical director, we're going to share that person with the town, 40% town work, 60% school work. And that's the way it went forward. The town never took over any technology for the school department in any way, shape, or form. The problem was, I think that position, that structure proved untenable. It's very difficult to work for 2 masters. And, you know, there aren't these other technical directors for the police, the fire. They use their own consultant to manage technology. So, you know, the representation in terms of technology is not really accurate in terms of what's happening in the real world right now in Milford. But, you know, those are the issues that we face, and, you know, they're not much different than what's been passed.
That dovetails right into priority capital projects. What do you see in your mind would be our priority capital projects, and when do you think we should address them?
Well, you know, I think, you know, and the EPA guidelines is not one project per se, but it's kind of insidious in that it permeates all projects. And I just gave you an example of how we dealt with it at the Armory. So that's something that's going to be built into a lot of capital projects we have. I think, you know, if the town wants to do something with Middle School East, that's going to be a major capital project. You know, the recreational facilities that we talk about, not as major, but Pheno Field is going to be a project that needs to be done. Now, John Fernandez has done a great job in getting us some earmarks, so that's going to be a foundation that the town can build on in terms of funding that. You know, I think those are the major ones, in addition to maintaining the projects that we have. You know, it's very difficult to ignore a project once it's done. We finished that building, it's all done, you don't have to do anything to it. Not really the case. So there's always going to be these ongoing maintenance needs, and that needs to be visible as one. But, you know, in terms of capital, and you know, because you're involved in it, John, you are too, and of course, Kevin, you cover everything. You know, Milford has been very proactive and very careful in maintaining its infrastructure so that we're in an enviable position right now.
Patrick, priority capital projects, and
Well,
when?
The largest priority capital project that I can think of is some major work being done to the Milford High School. That is, it's the last school building that we have. We've been maintaining it, it's in good shape, but it's at the point now where it was opened in 1974. So that building is going to need some very serious work done to it. We're at capacity in that building, and it's a building that we're going to have to address sooner than later. Ongoing brook work and maintenance. I live very near one of our more recent brook projects, and it was amazing to see the sort of the massive scale of what was put in place to repair that brook. I think most of our brooks were probably laid in the 1930s, and so they're at a point now where, I remember when I was a kid, I used to climb down into the brooks because they had these fieldstone rock walls, and you could catch whatever sort of critters you could down to the bottom of there. And you know, those just aren't going to last forever. And so we need to renovate them in the same way, you know, that we have renovated them. As we have been renovating them, you know, near where I live, which is a concrete structure and is underground. And so it's a massive project, and anyone that hasn't seen one, I mean, they essentially strip away the earth, they put in a conduit for the brook, and they put the earth back on top. So it's an amazing project, but it's also an expensive endeavor. And the third would be the middle school east building. I think that something needs to be done. So I believe in the past, they had presented an article to renovate the middle school east building, and that was defeated by town meeting. Town meeting didn't want that building to go forward as a school building, and so what was developed was a long-range educational plan. And the long-range educational plan, which was co-chaired, that committee was co-chaired by Representative Fernandez and Selectman Buckley, and it said that at the end of that plan, Middle School East will be turned back to the town. So that's been in place since 2004. So now we have a committee that's working on it, and they're going to figure out the best use for that building. But we have to be very careful. We're very limited in the ways that we can use that building, because if we put too many renovations into it, now suddenly we trigger the Americans with Disabilities Act, and we have to do massive upgrades to that structure. So I think it's a conundrum, but I do know that we have some very good people working on it, and I'm interested to see what the recommendations are. And in moving forward, we're certainly have to find a way to address it.
In finding a way to address it, you look at the levy limit. What are your feelings on taxing to the levy limit, the maximum allowed?
I am a proponent of only taking from the taxpayers what the town needs to provide the services that the taxpayers want. And so I don't think it's necessary to tax to the highest possible level that we can. I think that through a combination of fiscal discipline and through thoughtful planning, we can find ways to get the things that we need done in Milford done without doing so. And in fact, we don't regularly tax to the levy limit because we don't need to. And so long as we're paying attention to what we have in our stabilization fund, and so long as we're paying attention to our free cash, and we are remaining thoughtful in the way that we're planning these projects. For example, the Woodland School. I mean, we've known that the Woodland School has been coming down the road for 10 years. And so the Finance Committee has been a big proponent of putting together a plan to pay for that building using the funds that we have available. And so we didn't need a debt exclusion, we didn't need a Proposition 2.5 override to pay for that building. And so I think good planning has allowed us to not tax to the levy limit on a consistent basis. And I think if we continue to maintain the financial discipline and we continue to listen to the Finance Committee and we continue to have responsible people heading our departments, I don't think that that'll be necessary.
Brian, your thoughts on taxing to the levy limit?
Yeah, it's something that we haven't done consistently since I've been on the board. In fact, over the last 5 years, we've not taxed to the levy limit to the extent of $7.5 million. So, you know, right now, as we start the budget process, we have penciled in an amount, $1.8 million, that we're looking to not raise to the levy limit. And of course, what that means to folks watching is it's a reduction on your taxes. Because Milford has a dual tax rate, that reduction is higher to businesses than to residents, but it's still a reduction on your taxes. But, you know, I mean, you're right, that you get there by planning. It doesn't happen overnight. It has to be part of the budget process right away. And, you know, there's a difference with paying for projects with what you have and borrowing money. Now, the Armory, we were able to pay for that with what we have. There's no debt on that. The Woodland project, it's not subject to a 2.5 override, but that's borrowed. So that's going to hit our operating budget. And, you know, in terms of the plan going forward, you know, the excess over what we would ordinarily pay for debt, similar to your mortgage payment at home, is going to be drawn off the stabilization account. So, you know, it's something that I've advocated on the board while I've been on the board to varying degrees, depending upon where we are in terms of projects, where we are in terms of finances, and what makes sense going forward for the community as a whole. But it's almost a rite of passage in Milford. We've done it so consistently. Not every town does. And, you know, folks at home should understand that that's the exception rather than the rule. Not raising to the levy limit. We're fortunate in Milford that we can do that. Again, it doesn't happen overnight. It happens because a lot of people work very hard to plan that.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Al. So that finishes up our first round of questioning. We've only got about 5 minutes to go in our forum, so unfortunately we won't get around to everyone for one final question. We do want to sneak one more in, so Kevin, we'll circle back to you for one last question tonight.
Well, actually, I'm going to say that the answers from both candidates on that last question wiped out my question, so I'll defer to John and Al.
Okay.
John?
So if you're going to defer to me. A couple of years ago, the town meeting passed a bylaw concerning solar power in residential areas in town. And at the time, I supported it, but now in retrospect, looking back at it, I have to say that it's flawed because by limiting solar power installations to 25 kilowatts in residential areas, it basically means that we can't put anything larger than 25 kilowatts on any of our schools, where several of our schools have some significant roof space and could have some significant solar power on them. It basically limits us from doing that, and the bylaw doesn't have any mechanism whereby it can be overruled by the Zoning Board of Appeals or anybody like that. So your thoughts on that, if we were to bring forward a change to that bylaw, what are your thoughts? Would you support or oppose?
So, you know, I think that sounds like a great job for the chairman of the Renewable Energy Committee. Do you know who that is, John?
I do know who that is, yeah.
I think that sounds like a great project for the Renewable Energy Committee to come forward and give us a proposal that does make sense. You know, this solar energy, this is an evolving technology. I'm in support of it 150%. I don't know everything about it. I want to be educated on it. I think it's great for the community. If our bylaw needs to be tweaked, we need to rely upon committees like yours with that expertise to come forward and tell us why.
Okay, thank you. And Patrick, same question.
So I'm a huge proponent of renewable resources. I actually heat my home with firewood, and the reason I do that is because I want to reduce our dependence, or my family's dependence, and therefore our community's dependence on fossil fuels. And I think there are a number of reasons to do that. There are environmental reasons to reduce our dependence upon fossil fuels. There are also reasons of national security to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. So I think that we need to explore all of the energy resources that we have available to us, because as we move forward, I think as technology improves and the way solar cells improve, we will have an opportunity to capture a lot more of our electricity from the sun. I think that as a town, we haven't moved forward with a scheme or a plan that's been vetted to try and put together a philosophy for adopting solar energy. I mean, we have some zoning and we've put some bylaws in place, but I can't say that as a town we have a plan. And I think that like anything else in this world, when you have a plan, it's possible to execute competently. And when you try and fix with patches, then you end up with a patchwork that doesn't really address the need that you have. And so I think what I'd like to see with solar power, knowing that some of the roofs that we had are flat, and knowing that having solar panels on those roofs could potentially protect them from damaging ultraviolet radiation, which does in fact shorten the lives of those roofs. I think it's important that we move very thoughtfully as a town, and we move very thoughtfully as a community, moving forward in the way that we craft our philosophy around adopting solar power. So back to your original question, I know I sort of answered that in a very long way. Yes, I'm absolutely open to revising what's happening with those zoning rules. And I think more than that, I think that we should think very, very thoughtfully and very productively on how we adopt a scheme for rolling out solar power in our community, if it makes sense. You know, it's like anything else that we do. It can't be something that we do because we want to do it. It has to be an important part of the plan that we have moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Al, unfortunately, we don't have time for that last question. With the few moments we have left, and we only have about 2 minutes to go, I do want to give each of you a chance to give just a very brief closing remark. So again, we thank you so much for joining us this evening. We'll lead the closing arguments with you, Patrick.
So I feel like we need to, as a community, move forward with a long-range development plan. I don't think we have one. We can point to no single person in the community who is responsible for coordinating our different properties in town. We have been so focused on fixing things with money that we haven't used our facilities, we haven't used the people who have available to us, the members of the community, who can help us put together a thoughtful plan for crafting Milford into the town that we want it to be moving forward. I think that we have an opportunity now to seize, to sort of, we have an opportunity now to put together a plan that we're all comfortable with, that's going to enrich our community. And I'm the selectman that can move forward with that.
Thank you, Patrick. And Brian.
Well, we do have a plan. It's called the Comprehensive Plan. It was first started in 2003, and the Planning Board was commissioned in 2014 to revisit it, and they're working on that. Every year, the selectmen reviewed the community development strategy. So, you know, that process is in place. It's overseen, you know, by the town planner, of course, the planning board. You know, there's a lot of work to do in Milford, and I don't shy away from work. I try to learn about as much as I can that comes before me. I try to make responsible decisions. I try to make decisions that are in the best interest of the community. I think Milford is facing some very, very serious decisions going forward. I would ask people to look at my track record of things that were done. I think Milford's in a great position. I'd like to say that I have at least some little bit of responsibility for that, and I'm asking people for the opportunity to continue to do that work.
Thank you so much. Gentlemen, we thank you again very much for participating in tonight's forum. And panelists, John Teehan, Al CORREIA, Kevin Rudden, thank you very much for participating. And thank you all for tuning in tonight, and make sure you get out and vote on April 5th. From all of us here at Milford TV, this is Tim Coet. So long, everybody.